Good day to you, friends. I am Drew Landry, and this is the Outsider Podcast. In today's episode, I dive into the Texas House Speaker's race as it will finally end on January the 14th. Well, we hope it will end anyway. I will not get into the brass tacks of all that. My friend and excellent journalist from Quorum Report, Scott Braddock, and ace political reporter from the Houston Chronicle, Jeremy Wallace, discussed that in length and in depth in their podcast entitled The Texas Take. And I'll have that episode linked in the details of this particular episode, so you can check that out for yourself. You can also find my writings on the perspective that I'll give you is not so much as to what's been reported, but why we're here, okay, and how much that will affect the upcoming session. I'll also give you some insight as to why the speakership means so much to these West Texans as opposed to others. So in great anticipation and in great haste, let's do this. So how did we get here in this speaker's race? In answering that question, we'll also answer another question. What's the House Speaker even do? Well, we got here because current House Speaker Dade Phelan did not have the votes to recapture the gavel for a third term. And why is that the case? Well, there's been many reports, but let's just put it very plainly. The House changed, okay? The House changed because of the gains in the November election. And so that put him in a perilous situation. And he also lost key allied support, and from there it was essentially over. And again, we can always go back to 2023 for that session. And some argued even then, and you got to give credit where it's due there. They argued that, well, this was a bad session. The impeachment of Kim Paxton didn't go nearly as well. A lot of the blame on that is really Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick's fault, but that's a whole other conversation for another time. Matter of fact, it's an old conversation that's already happened, but, let's just leave that there. You can even go back to when the primaries took place, and the fact that he was forced into a runoff, and he wins re-election in the May runoff by about less than 400 votes. And then you can take it back to the big September meeting with a lot of Republicans who felt there was blood in the water when it came to Phelan's speakership candidacy. And they met at the County Line barbecue joint in Austin. And then they essentially all coalesced around David Cook to be their nominee for House Speaker. That said, that put Dade Phelan in a lot of problems. That put his whole candidacy in a lot of perilous situations, really, when two of his main allies switched support from him to Cook. So the speakership of Dade Phelan can be characterized in many ways. But I think one thing that needs to be remembered is the fact that he stood up for House members, and he also stood up to Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. Those are going to be two of the big things that he ought to be remembered for. Now, obviously that depends on what circles that you're in when you discuss Speaker Phelan. But I think there's an objective perspective in all this, and those two things have to be at the top of the list when you discuss the two terms that he presided over the legislature's lower chamber. I mean, let's also remember that Phelan's candidacy, well, not his candidacy, but his speakership, annoyed Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick so much that Patrick actively campaigned against Dade Phelan in the primary and later in the runoff. So let's not think that that Patrick was not actively involved in any of this, because he was. He very much was. So why is this such a big deal? Why is the speakership this coveted position? Well, I've mentioned this before in previous episodes and in my previous writings, but it bears repeating here. It's coveted for several reasons. One is the fact that if you're the Speaker of the House, this tells you that House members, the 149 other members in the Texas House, trust you to lead them in the next session. That you being the next Speaker gives them reassurance that you will be someone who will be fair to all of its members, so that they can represent their own districts and they can do the work of the people who elected them. Two is the House Speaker has a hand in shaping the legislative agenda. That entails not only what items will come to the House floor, but also creating committees and appointing committee members and committee chairs. Three, you have essentially two sets of constituencies. One is the House membership, and the other is the one who elected you to send you to Austin to begin with. So you have to have a sense of representing not just the district that elected you, but also the very chamber that you're meant to also represent when you deal with the governor, when you deal with the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, the ag commissioner, land commissioner. Lots of other people are going to be in play in this, but you're the House Speaker, and you have to represent 149 other people. That also is going to come true whenever it comes time for lawmaking, because you may be taking on a task that some of those members may not be particularly thrilled about dealing with, and so they're going to come to you and say, hey, look, I'm not comfortable with this issue. You have to be somebody who can even go as far as protecting your members. So the question becomes, when you're dealing with, particularly with the other chamber, the upper chamber, the Texas Senate, will you stand up for your chamber? Or will you cower when the bell tolls? There's other reasons that go along with this, but all members desire, every single one of them, they desire a fair opportunity to do their jobs. At least that's what they'll claim. Okay? In open and public discussions. Now, with all the partisanship taking place within the Republican caucus, what we essentially have here is something that I wrote a few years ago. It's called the Washingtonization of Texas politics. Note that this is the House Republicans who want to abandon a years-long tradition of bipartisan coalition governing. They believe somehow House Democrats, the party out of power, have some sort of extenuating power, some sort of extenuating influence, this invisible hand ability to craft the agenda in the Texas House. And you can watch this 30-minute mockumentary. I'm not even going to call it a documentary. It's a mockumentary made by a far-right extremist. He's a nut. He's also an attention seeker. His name is Michael Quinn Sullivan. But instead of watching it, I would actually advise you to watch something that's much more accurate than that, and that would be the great film This Is Spinal Tap. All right? That film, This Is Spinal Tap, is much more accurate and entertaining than what Mr. Sullivan derived from emotions and feelings. Nothing based on fact. Let's understand that where they get this sort of thing all derives from electing the House Speaker. And it's been the Republican Party because, well, look, they've been in the majority of the House since 2003, 21 years. And because Tom Craddick, who was Speaker of the House from 2003 to 2009, because of his, this isn't a play on words here, his autocratic leadership style, and that's not a narrative that's been researched, very much out in the open. There's nothing insinuating here. You ask any member who served in that time and who has served in the legislature even before then, and they would tell you this was not member-driven. It was very much top-down leadership. But because there were about 20 or so Republicans in the House, and all the Democrats were able to coalesce with, and that made a majority, by the way. They were able to coalesce around a 3-term member from San Antonio by the name of Joe Strauss. And ever since then, these far-right nuts, these fringe people on the conservative side have not exactly liked this whole thing about electing speakers and Democrats being involved in it. It's this little factoid that they claim that's the basis for all of this nonsense, that somehow Democrats run the Texas House. I can't tell you how laughable of a thought that is. And how is that laughable? You just look at the bills that were passed in the last 4, 5, 6 sessions. Can you tell me what a majority of them were? Were they conservative or were they liberal? I think you know the answer to that question. But I wanted you to know where all this stemmed from, where all this stemmed. And it stemmed from that. And it continues to this whole idea that there was this massive coup d'etat that ousted Craddick, and that there was this sense of leading from the political middle ever since. I can't force people to think one way or the other. I'm in higher education and I get blamed for, this whole thing about indoctrinating. Well, if indoctrination was true, we wouldn't have signs in the bathroom urging people to wash their hands. Okay? Nor would there be signs in the bathroom reminding people not to flush paper towels down the toilets. Needs to be reminded. I can barely get students to do the reading that's required. I don't know what indoctrinating I'm doing, but apparently it's the wrong one. Goodness gracious. You can tell I get a little miffed about that. But let's get back onto this whole thing here. Let's understand that this small factoid has been blown up. And it's entirely untrue. Democrats, they want a seat at the table so that they can represent their districts. You take that away from them, and as I mentioned this in my piece within the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, if you take this away from them, what motivating factor will they have to want to help the Republicans to pass things like constitutional amendments? I mean, why? So it's really silly here. But I want to understand, I highlight all this so that you can get the idea that this very notion is beyond preposterous. And why entertain it? Because it's a hot topic in Republican circles. That's why. In order to weaken the Democratic side, rules to where only the Republican caucus will select the next speaker because they are, after all, in the majority. Now, I totally understand that. That is a completely legitimate mindset. We're in the majority. We should be able to do this. And they believe that they should govern as such. Of tradition, let's just understand this, the party of tradition, the Republican Party, wants to break tradition in exchange for power. It's a little ironic, don't you think? So, as we continue with this, let's ask the obvious question here. How is that going to affect the upcoming session? Well, the obvious answer to that question is we don't know. We're not going to know anything until January 14th. That is the absolute truth. But as we can see right this very minute, and even whenever you're listening to this, provided you're not listening after January 14th, Republicans are split on this very issue. And the emerging candidate whom claims to be the next speaker is Lubbock's very own Dustin Burrows. And as we have gone over this several times, and it's been reported several times, he claims to have the bipartisan support that's over a majority of the members to be the next speaker. Although the media, Texas media, has reported that there's been several other people who have signed onto a list who no longer want to be on the list, and so therefore he does not have a majority. So who do we believe? Well, again, we're going to find out here, but here's why a lot of this is all up to speculation. It's because Burrows doesn't talk to the media unless he wants to talk to them. All right? That's a fairly skillful tactic because it doesn't bring to light what he doesn't want to be brought into the light. And he gets to control the narrative and the story. It's a very good skill. All right? But with that said, icing out, meaning not allowing any sort of chair committees for Democrats, is not looking like to be a winning strategy, especially for David Cook, because he made the big pledge. Let's remember now, he made the big pledge, no Democratic chairs. Democrats said, go with anybody, not David Cook. I wonder why. Democrats have their own candidate. Will they end up supporting that candidate? It's Ana Marie Ramos, who's been in the state legislature since 2018. Well, since 2019, excuse me. Part of the movement of the Democrats who won 12 seats in that 2018 midterm election. Will they support that candidate, or will they want to go with the bipartisan tradition and go with somebody who will claim to treat them fair? Well, here's what I think they ought to do. And this is unpopular with House Democrats. I want you to know that. House Democrats constantly claim that they want to be the adults in the room and they want to govern and they want to, do all these things. This is part of the reason they're still in the minority. Because they think there's a set of rules that they can actually go by. When you realize that when you're in the majority and you set the rules, stuff doesn't matter anymore. They don't realize it yet. They haven't been in power for over 20 years. So, whatever. But here's my advice to them. Let the Republicans do it. Let them take responsibility for all the things that are going to happen in this upcoming session. Just vote against it. You say, well, how's that helpful? Well, you're giving the Republicans exactly what they want. If they want to make the Texas legislature like Congress, let them do it. If they want to have fight after fight after fight over who controls the lower chamber, let them do it. Put it on full display. That the Republican Party of Texas in the legislature is having fight after fight after fight after fight after fight, vote after vote after vote after vote, and show that it's them who are behaving like kids at camp during an unsupervised mess hall. That they're having food fights all over the place. And let them deal with it. Just let them. And then you say, well, part of that, you then campaign against it. You see, why is that unpopular? Because again, as I said before, Democrats want to govern. And they seem to think that, this is some sort of Mr. Rogers neighborhood. That everyone's just going to happily get along on all this. They want to ice you out. I mean, Burrows did not take a pledge saying that he was going to not appoint any sort of Democratic chairs, that a vote can happen on the House floor for the rules for the chamber in that session. He's in favor of the rules coming out. And since the Republicans have a majority, it's going to be their rules, and that's going to be a rule. I don't understand why they don't see this. Maybe they do, and they're not telling anybody. I totally get that sort of perspective. But governing's one thing. But we're in a whole new paradigm when it comes to politics. And we have to remember that you have to give as good as you get. I mean, do you want to tell me that if everything was flipped, like if Texas was a strong Democratic state, and it was the Democrats having this particular issue, do you think the Republicans would actually help them? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. When the Republican caucus was first formed in the 1980s, and by Tom Craddock, Adam Medlin, I mean, he was very powerful. I mean, he was very instrumental in getting this done. I mean, he worked tirelessly to get this sort of thing done. Let's be very clear about that. He deserves all the credit. But let's be very clear. His whole mindset was to get a majority and to become House Speaker. If Democrats were having a problem in electing a speaker, they didn't. But if they did, and it was this sort of show that we're having here, Republicans would just say, forget it. They wouldn't be bailing them out. Now, I know what you're saying to me, but Drew, governing is about bringing people together. Why would you not want to help out the other side? Well, at some point you have to stand up for yourself. And the Democrats have been pushed around and pushed around and pushed around on almost everything. This is part of the big reason that if you know anything about the Texas legislature, you know that Democrats do not run the Texas House. You know that. And so, former Democratic caucus chair Trey Martinez Fisher sent a letter saying, we need to stay united and we need to hold our influence and really just in a sense keep our powder dry. I'm urging you for that. That's kind of what he was saying there. I think I'm just saying they need to go a little bit further. Take it a step farther and say, you don't want us in any of those things anyway, so why should we help you? You know? And here's what they can do. When we all know, priority numero uno for El Jefe Abbott, for Governor Abbott, is the school vouchers. It's going to be that school voucher program of education savings accounts. When that happens, and I think Democrats should probably fight really hard on that too. Maybe even stage a walkout. But at some point, there's going to be a vote. No matter how long they try to hold out, no matter how long it happens, there's no limit on how many special sessions the governor can call. You can't stay out of the state forever and still be a state lawmaker. But you can make the point, and if they stage a walkout, and what they're going to do there by doing that sort of thing, is show that the Democrats are the party of the average families who send their children to public schools, and the party of the public school teachers. That's what they're going to show by doing that. But when the vote happens, and the Republicans will win it, the Democrats can later show that all the examples that have happened in other states are coming to Texas. I mean, we've seen constantly that Arizona's been having an ongoing battle, a budget battle with all that. Now in Florida, now in Ohio, now in Indiana. Interesting that all these states are having a domino effect on this. There's actual propositions to have families who make 400% above the federal poverty rate to qualify for a school voucher. Okay? Let that sink in. Because I want to remind you that the whole argument about school vouchers 30 years ago, 35 years ago, close to 40 years ago, was to help low-income students to get out of quote-unquote failing schools. That was the argument. You can Google it. I mean, I'm not telling you anything that you can't find. That was the whole debate. That was the whole conversation. We have to stop letting our low-income students not have a chance. It was all this, rhetoric. Well played out, I'm not going to lie. But let's be very clear. That whole rhetoric is gone. It's no longer that. It has nothing to do with any of those things anymore. Now, I mean, they don't even make, the argument is now about this quote-unquote choice, the school choice malarkey, which, again, that can be easily rebuffed within a minute. But the second that those things come to Texas, and we see local schools close and consolidations happening, as we are already seeing them happen here in Lubbock, you have to make the Republicans own it. And I just want to ask, if this ever gets around any Democratic lawmakers, why would you want to be a part of that sort of thing? Why would you want to be a part of one of the worst sessions around? Because the session that hasn't even started yet, like when I recorded this, and we're already seeing the possibility that this could be worse than what happened in 2017, the 85th legislative session. And here we are coming upon the 89th. And we have to be asking ourselves here, why would you want to be part of a bad session? Well, I might be able to do a few good things. See, that's what a rational person does. That's what rational grown-ups do, is that you get it. But that's not how you utilize power. You say, well, Drew, you're thinking of campaigning while governing. Yes, I'm thinking as a Republican. They're in power. They win. Why would you not want to think like that? All right. Made the point. Let's move on here. But what about the upcoming session if Burrows is actually to be the next speaker? What does that mean with his relationship for Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick? Should Burrows take the gavel, the hope that they can get along is all that we can really do. I mean, obviously we'll see what happens with that if that path is to be taken, because it was clear that Patrick wants David Cook to be the speaker because he apparently followed the rules. And he wants to, reward those who follow the rules. Okay, fine. But my thinking about why he wants Cook could be possibly that, but it also could be this other thing. That Burrows was in a lot of conversations with Patrick and his staff in negotiating bills and deals on behalf of Speaker Phelan. Let's remember, Burrows was part of Phelan's team. He was part of the big four legislative committees. And in case you're curious what those big four are, appropriations, calendars, state affairs, and ways and means. Those are the big four House committees. And he was on Ways and Means under Bonin, and he was on calendars under Phelan. And so what we have here is somebody who was a lot of go-between, who served as a go-between on behalf of Phelan when talking with Patrick and Patrick's people. But my gut feeling is that wouldn't continue. Because this cloud that just follows Burrows and all this is that he's somehow some sort of Phelan 2.0. I don't know. I mean, that's what they call him, with Dade Phelan 2.0. He's more Bonin. But that's a whole other conversation for another time. But if that follows him around, how would that work for Patrick? Because let's remember, Dade Phelan stood up for House members. And therefore he stood up against Lieutenant Governor Patrick several times in 2021 and in 2023. And he took a lot of the blame. And Phelan also gave as good as he got. Let's know that. Phelan just didn't sit back and just be like, and was like a duck in rain and just shrugged it off. That's not the case. He pushed back. Does Burrows have that? I have a suspicion that David Cook doesn't. And it's not because it's not just following the rules that Patrick wants Cook to be speaker. My guess is that Patrick feels that he can control Cook and that Patrick can't control Burrows. I think Abbott can control Burrows. But that's, again, another thing here. But let's understand that if, tormenting the lieutenant governor and his agenda by standing up for House members, that may appeal to some Democrats who may not want to heed the advice that I gave earlier by staying out of it. Well, he'll stand up for us when it comes to issues with Dan Patrick. Maybe he will. I don't think David Cook has it in him to do something like that. I'm always wary of if the lieutenant governor wants someone from the House to do something, because I automatically think that it's because the lieutenant governor has something in store for that person, that he's got his own little controls on that lawmaker in the House. So I'm there's always something nefarious going on with Lieutenant Governor Patrick. I will always believe that until it's not. But let's remember here, as I've stated before, this session hasn't started yet, and it's already appearing to be rocky. But then again, maybe everything will smooth over. We'll see. Now, I want to tell you a little bit of things here about why Dustin Burrows wants to be speaker. And look, it's the same reason everyone else wants to be speaker. You talk to any former speaker, you talk to any former House Speaker candidate, you talk to anybody who on staff with all this, they'll tell you the same thing. Everybody wants to be House Speaker. And I 1,000% believe that. Okay? So ambition is the biggest reason. I have no doubts about that whatsoever. But why Burrows? Well, here's what the rumor and innuendo are. Is that he's wanted the gavel for some time, and again, that's true for everybody. But the other part of the rumor and innuendo is that he and other former and other Lubbock delegation in the Texas legislature are tired of hearing about Pete Laney. And I go, huh? Well, he's tired of hearing about the last Lubbock representative to be speaker was Pete Laney. Now, in some circles that gets brought up. And they're all cognizant as to who Pete Laney is and what his leadership style was. And there's people in the legislature who were there with Laney. They're still there. Some lobbyists who were in the legislature when Laney, they know him. The Texas media hasn't brought this up, either because they don't know or lazy or thought it was irrelevant or all of the aforementioned, but it's actually rather important. Because when we think about Laney's leadership abilities, it was all about member first. And if you talk to people who served in the legislature under Laney and Craddock, they can tell you that there's a clear difference in leadership abilities. Clear difference in ideas on leadership and when taking on the role of being the House Speaker. And Burrows so far has, to his credit, has kind of echoed that. I mean, if you look at some of the opinion pieces that he has written, that it's the people's house. And I will work to make sure that sort of thing that sort of thing remains. Fair enough. Words matter, but actions matter more. Actions are the truth teller of your words. So, should Burroughs get the gavel? I think it's 1,000% fair, and it's incumbent to compare him to Speaker Laney. Now, to be fair, Laney had a record, and he's been out of office for some time, and so there's 5 terms there where 5 terms worth, and Burroughs doesn't have a record yet as being Speaker, if he's even going to be Speaker. But let's just not say that Laney had a record. He had a tremendous record of representation and of Speaker leadership. And what bothers almost every lawmaker in Lubbock is that leadership has cast a shadow on all other future leaders. Same to be said for former State Senator Robert Duncan. I mean, he was highly regarded and highly respected leadership in the Senate, a deal maker, not a bomb thrower. So how do those names disappear? Well, you attempt to surpass them. But look, we'll see how all this stuff works out, obviously. But we know that the legislature convenes on Tuesday, January 14th. And my sincerest hope, which I want to say is the same for all of you, is that this crazy situation gets sorted out. And the people's business can finally be a priority on day one. I mean, what we're seeing here is something that we really haven't seen. I mean, Burroughs has done some interviews, and he's said that he's sorry that all this has gotten so public, because usually speaker races are behind the scenes. Usually. And I think that's both good and bad. It's good because it gives the perception that the house is in order and that you can see how a clear winner emerges, and great. But it's bad because the people don't really know. So transparency has a double-edged sword. I don't really think it's all objectively, it's a double-edged sword. But we'll see what happens here. Both sides have, unless the Republican Party of Texas is going to be very firm in their punishments for those who violate the rules, the caucus rules that Dustin Burroughs helped write, that he contrived in 2018, and then whenever he became caucus chair, he did all that. And there's interviews, and there's all the conversations that can be had about it is out there. You can go find them. It's not hard to find. That said, it looks like that if the Republicans can't get all this together, and if the Republican Party doesn't follow through on their threats, that the Democrats are going to have to be the ones to bail them out. And what kind of reward will they get? That's a fair question. And that's a question that bothers a lot of Republican primary voters. We'll see. Well, friends, thanks for listening. You can find me on Blue Sky at Drew L. Landry, or you can find me on Threads at drew.l.landry. You can feel free to subscribe to the Outsider Podcast on YouTube. That's right. This video portion that you are seeing now, if you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe to it, hit that notifications bell to where you never miss an episode. You can look for the Outsider Podcast in the search bar. As always, you can find the podcast on Apple iTunes or on Spotify. All right, I'm Drew Landry. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again very soon.